the hour of the uninvited guest. We have all been there, that deep, quiet hour of the night when the world outside falls silent and you are alone with your thoughts and perhaps with something else. For a student pushing past midnight to meet a deadline, the darkness becomes a demanding deadline all its own. There is a moment when exhaustion blurs the line between reality and hallucination. A moment when the hum of the laptop and the drone of audiobook are the only defenses against the void. But what happens when the void decides to knock back? I am Paul, and you are listening to the Stories Philippines podcast, The Grind and the Gateway. This story comes from Jurel, a young man who was an ambitious grade 9 student back in 2024. His section was highly competitive, and the teacher, particularly the Filipino literature instructor, focusing on Noli Me Tangere, demanded extravagant outputs. This pushed Jurel, an already creative student, to spend long, late hours designing and crafting his required activities. His school day ran from noon until 6 in the evening. After a brief rest, Jurel would start his output work, typically beginning around 9 o'clock p.m. He had a routine, a specific ritual that helped him cope with the long hours. He always listened to horror stories on his laptop, often tuning into popular horror narrators. For 3 to 5 hours a night, Jurel was immersed in two worlds: the academic pressure of his competitive high school and the chilling narratives of the paranormal. His work usually concluded around 2 o'clock a.m., which was the time his parents woke up to begin cooking food for their business. He relied on this human alarm clock, a sign that the safe, rational world of his family was about to reassert itself. The incident he shared took place around 12:10. I am in the deepest, most silent part of the night, when the separation between waking and sleeping, between reality and nightmare, is at its most fragile. The atmosphere changes. Jurel was engrossed in his design work and the horror story narration playing through his laptop speakers. Then, the first sign of disruption, the air itself changed. A sudden strong gust of wind rushed through his space, accompanied by an intense, unexplained cold. This wasn't just a draft. He described the cold as a palpable, penetrating sensation that defied the typical tropical heat of the Philippines. He tried to ignore it, attributing it to the time of night or an open window, and he continued working. But the presence refused to be dismissed. The next event was a classic paranormal signature: electrical failure. His task lamp, which he used for focused light, suddenly went out. Yet, his laptop, which was plugged in, remained on. This is where the event shifts from a simple power hiccup to something actively interfering with his environment. The laptop, Jurel noted, required a continuous power connection to run. If there had been a simple brownout, the laptop would have died instantly. Instead, the lamp's light flickered back on. Then, the laptop began to blink, cycling on and off repeatedly, before finally dying. Why would only the lamp and the laptop, the tools of his late-night work, be affected, and not the entire house? In paranormal theory, it is believed that spirits, especially those manifesting or attempting to communicate, draw energy from electrical sources. The unstable flickering of the lamp and the laptop's erratic behavior suggests that an entity was present and actively siphoning energy from his immediate workspace. It was a direct interference with the focus of his concentration. The knock and the whisper. The environment was now charged, the laptop was dead, and Jurel was sitting alone in a room where the laws of physics seemed to have been suspended. The intense cold returned, But this time he felt it precisely on the back of his neck, a common physical sensation associated with the presence of a spirit or an icy draft from the other side. He restarted his laptop, trying to maintain his routine and his sanity. It was then the final and most unnerving part of the encounter occurred. First, there was a knock, a loud, deliberate sound. He dismissed it as a product of his exhaustion, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep, a phenomenon known as a hypnagogic hallucination, often experienced by people pushed to the limits of sleep deprivation. Then it happened again. This time there was no doubt. It was a rapid, repeated, physical knocking sound. Katok! It was real. Simultaneously, the intense gust of wind, the chilling breath returned. This time, it was directed right into his ear, carrying a whisper. He could feel the air pressure, the chilling sensation, but he could not understand the sound. Someone was talking to him, muttering or murmuring words he could not comprehend. This is a profoundly terrifying moment. The confirmation of an entity that is not just observing, but actively communicating or attempting to communicate a message that is both urgent and unintelligible. The physical phenomenon, the whispering wind, the flickering light, accompanied the sound, signaling a full-fledged manifestation, psychological and cultural explanations. Jor-El's story perfectly illustrates the interplay between psychological stress and paranormal experience. Psychological perspectives, the late hours, the stress of competition, and the exhaustion of a high school schedule create a psychological vulnerability. The environment becomes ripe for auditory and tactile hallucinations. The whispering might have been tinnitus, an internal ringing or buzzing, coupled with pareidolia, the tendency of the brain to seek patterns, making the sound seem like an unintelligible voice. However, the fact that the knocking was distinct and repeated, and the electrical issues were specific, argues against a purely psychological explanation. It brings us back to the folklore and cultural context. The time of the event, just after midnight, is often referred to globally as the witching hour, or, in Filipino culture, the time when spirits are most active because the barrier between worlds is thin. In Filipino belief, the knocking, or katok, is often a common way that ancestral spirits or elementals announce their presence or attempt to get attention. Unlike the malicious aswang or tikbalang, this could be a nido ancestral spirit or a protective encanto wanting to warn or check on a lone person awake. The fact that the voice was unintelligible is also significant. It suggests a being speaking a language or from a dimension that the human mind cannot process. A classic narrative device used in both local and international accounts of spectral communication, retreat, and resolution. The encounter was too much for Jor-El. He didn't wait for his parents' 2 o'clock a.m. wake-up call. He immediately shut down his laptop. He did the opposite of what he was doing. He played lively music, masasayang kanta, an ancient human defense mechanism against the dark, replacing the chilling narratives of the horror stories with a loud, bright reality of music. He quickly finished his output, putting function and speed over the detailed design he usually strove for. He did not linger. He went straight to bed. From that night forward, Jor-El changed his routine. He no longer worked into the deep hours alone. He started waiting for his mother to wake up, seeking the grounding presence of his family before he would retire. The experience taught him a powerful, unspoken lesson. When you invite the darkness in through horror stories and embrace the silence of the deepest hour, you might just find that you're no longer listening alone. The uninvited guest, announced by a cold wind and a clear, loud knock, will always be the most terrifying presence. This experience from Jurel reminds us that even in the most familiar settings, a student's desk, a late night study session, the veil can unexpectedly lift, offering a glimpse into a world that doesn't respect our deadlines or our sleep schedules. With this slide, before we take a break, let me invite you once again to share your own stories. Whether it's a chilling historical account, a family legend, or a paranormal encounter like Jorel's, we want to hear it. You can visit us at storiesphilippines.com to submit your narrative. Also, please remember that this podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you enjoy the atmosphere and the depth we bring to these stories, please consider supporting the show financially. Check the show notes for links to our Patreon and other support platforms. Your contributions give you access to exclusive content, extended episodes, and much more. Follow us on social media, subscribe, and share this episode with friends. Check out storiesphilippines.com for all the latest updates. We will return shortly with another tale from the shadowlands of the Philippines.